She kept on moving to the side. Please don't start yet.
You see, Hong Kong talks about how our DPM has hardly any arguments. Sadly to say, her argument is not particularly strong either in today's debate. Let's take a look at what she said. She says, well, because some people are engaged in corporate social responsibility, therefore they're at a disadvantage. Therefore, the only way for their solution to work is to have every single company in the world be engaged in corporate social responsibility so that they can have a fair trade. That's sort of a little bit contradictory to what their stance is, because initially what THB came up and talked about was this idea that only really big companies that make really huge impacts should be engaged in these kind of corporate social responsibility. Hong Kong talks about, well, everyone else must do it. We say, whoa, that's a little bit shifted stance. But let's take a look at a solution that actually exists in the status quo towards your thing. It's called tariff and it's called taxation. It's a very simple economic 101 process. If you think that other countries are engaged in corporate social responsibility and you're at a disadvantage, then you impose some sort of tax and make the price equal. We don't see why this problem must be solved through corporate social responsibility, especially if it's going to be engaging in all the risks in which the government side will be talking about. So I want to talk about a couple of things. A, I want to talk about, is it the responsibility of corporations to take care of the society? Secondly, I want to talk about the net benefit, because ultimately we have to ask ourselves, what are we asking for in this debate? We're asking for a betterment of the society. We're asking for what ultimately is good for both the corporation and individual in the society as well. But we think what the opposition side is trying to say is they're very one-sided. They're trying to say individual is definitely better than corporation. We don't think that's the case. Let's take a look at the first thing. Is it the responsibility of corporations to take care of the society? Now, this is when the government and opposition side don't really clash, right? The government side says it's the government's responsibility. Therefore, there's a big difference between regulation and forcing these corporations to do something. A very clear example is this. We think that it's okay for governments to say, for example, you cannot contaminate over 2% of the river. If you do, we'll make you do some crap. We say that's fine because that's a type of government regulation that prevents you from doing something. But we think it's particularly wrong if the government starts to say now you have to actively go help those kids in Africa. You have to actively go out and plant trees. Just for the heck of it, even if I'm an oil company, you have to actively do so. We think that there's a huge difference between government regulations and government acting you to do something. The opposition side then says, well, we'll then just make the government regulation to make you to do actively something, We say, no, that's the thing that we're debating on. We don't want those kind of regulations in the end. We just need to make that clear, all right? So then, the government side, and this is when opposition side says this. The government, we agree that the government has the responsibility, but we're going to force the corporations to do so. We know that there's really a missing link in between, because even if the government forces the corporation to do so, and even if the corporation has the capability to do so, it still doesn't justify why it is the corporation's responsibility, which is, by the way, what this debate is about, to do so in the end of the day. And they actually did tackle a little bit. They say, well, because corporation has more impacts on the society, therefore, they gotta do it. 2 points. Number one, it contradicts what Pawn is trying to say, and that is making every single corporation do so, because some corporations may have almost zero impact, and you're still forcing them to do so. But B, we say, why isn't the status quo enough? And this is what my first and second speaker really hampered on them in today's debate. Because we say, through the process of profit generation, we argue from the government side that corporations are already fulfilling their social responsibility, and we think it's enough. There's no need to do more. The reason why we say that, particularly from T's argument, is we think that the role of the corporation is already to substantiate the economy of the country. When they go up and with their mission statement, they don't say, well, we're going to make sure a betterment of humankind. They say we want to make profit. And it is their role to maximize profit for the shareholders in the end of the day. So we think that that's a very clear-cut line. Since when does saving kids in Africa, or since when does helping to plant more trees part of their agenda and part of responsibility? They say, well, since the government imposed it. But there's that missing link again, because you never justify to us why do we have to necessarily put in environment into something. Look, if I'm a richer corporation, I may or may not have more responsibility on the fields in which I'm interested, and that is satisfying most of my shareholders. And especially if I'm a corporation that has a huge impact, TITA says, well, it's not that much of an impact because the profit that you're getting, you're only going to hire a few more people, so that's not too good. If they want to talk about corporations with huge impact, we're talking about corporations with hundreds and thousands or even millions of employees. We think that's a very significant impact on the economy. Because essentially what they're doing is they're not just providing employment, but they're also contributing in terms of imports and exports, consumers, and rolling around the economy. And that's fundamentally what corporations are there to begin with. Since when is it their responsibility to feed hungry kids in Africa in the end of the day? So essentially what happened, and it makes sense, right? Because if the opposition wants to say, well, yeah, now we're just going to do CSR, we'll make them do so. Han even admits that when companies do CSR, they're at a disadvantage. Look, if they're at a disadvantage, in order to achieve their CSR, what must they do? Number one, they must cut down their employees, or they must cut down costs. In order for that to happen, in the end of the day, it is still society who's the ones that's suffering. So shame on you, any of you.
Sir, so why does the government has to deduct the profit from the corporations in terms of tax? Why don't they just have the rights to keep all the money they want because it only serves so
Okay,
profit?
first of all, we think that this is a very shady line coming from the opposition side, because when you talk about tax, they also tax the corporation as well as everyone else in the world. However, when you talk about corporate social responsibility, you are only forcing those corporations to save plant trees in Africa. We think that's the main distinction coming from the side of this side of the debate. Han came up and talked about an example, like, oh, in Spain, there's people make it mandatory to donate organs. The answer to that, the response to that example is that that's the reason why only out of 500 countries in the world, only Spain is doing that freaking thingy, because we don't think that it's good, or only however many countries is doing that, right? And even if a lot of countries doing that, we're still saying that's wrong. That's the debate. One example does not win you. But let's take a look at the second point. We say, why isn't profit enough? Because as what my second speaker, Kemama, talked about, eventually what we're talking about is we're talking about the net benefit coming and generating out of society. If they want to force these countries to do, force these companies or corporations to go for corporate social responsibility, essentially the initial cost that they have to sacrifice is through their own expense. But company being profit-natured, they're not going to do so. They're going to cut down their own costs, and that will eventually turn back to society as well. But what's more important, and this is something in which Pal talked about, is this whole idea of how it devalues the idea of corporate social responsibility. Because now companies, they don't have the incentive to do so anymore. Han was very happy when she said, yeah, see, Coke, they have the incentive to do it, right? Because it's beneficial for them. Look, if it's really beneficial for them, then there's no need to force them. Because if they already have an incentive to do so, then they will do so on their own expense. The reason why they're not doing so is because they don't have the capability and capacity to do so. And the moment that happens, you're going to reflect it back from the society. And we think that's really, really wrong. We're very proud to propose. Thank you.
You can hold for 7 minutes and 8 seconds. 7 or 8.
เขาก็พูดแบบจิไปเยอะแกเขาถ่ายวิดีโอ Dude, be right back. What is that? Coffee? Okay.
Just get the
That's 2 points off.
Why? Yeah, Kyrie's not there. Yeah, she went back to America. I'm not there.
I'll give you 3 points.
Well, we all have our. Yeah. She's really rednecky. Not that much, but for her, New Zealand, yeah, old school. Don't put it on YouTube.
We think the stance from opposition is simple. Everyone in society should contribute back. We cannot rely only on government. Sure, we agree that government should do their role, but however, there's still a little space where company can help as well, right? Our logic is that, well, we see that company have large impact in society. They operate their work. Thousands of workers in that community is involved in that company. Their faith and their life rely on logic is three things. Number one, well, we have big impact on society. However, we'll do nothing because it's charity. We don't do it. Number two, they said, well, tax is enough, right? We just government do their thing. We don't care what government would do with the money. We don't care at all. So we still at the end of the day will do nothing. Thirdly, they say that, well, our company expand, we employ more workers. Therefore, we're going to do nothing without regarding how minimum wage those workers are getting, not regarding how much impact in the long run that the company is making. So shame on you, Kevin, that you not even see the harm that is. Now, before I go on to my flashers, I have one clarification, right? We see that companies that have big impact to the society contribute back. THB did not say that small companies do not contribute or whatever. We think that big company, big impact, big contributions, that's our stance. Now, Kevin.
Okay, in your opening speech, you say these companies impact thousands and thousands of lives. Is that not enough of a contribution to you already?
So what happened in the long run where company move back? What happened in the long run if company decide to go evil? We don't have the check and balance to that level, right? We think that, sure, the law is that, but we have to have an extra mechanism that company actually give back something. The company actually be forced to plant back the trees, the forest that they cut. I'll give you an example of what happened in Africa, right? The Chinese corporation goes in and then operates and then involve many people's lives, and we think those corporation is not being regulated properly. How about we deal with that in your case? We think those companies should have their moral high ground at the first place as well, that they should give back something. Okay, we employ you worker, then what? We don't care about your healthcare? Is that what you are saying? We think company should build school, give education, train new workers, and we think that there's no status quo on your side at all that safeguard this problem. And therefore we think that by making it mandatory is an essential thing, that it can be extra mechanism that add on to the law, because right now we don't see that incentive at all. Now, okay. So move on a bit to the second level of the first part, that why corporation social responsibility actually improve and create progress in society. I want to pinpoint the distinction from the law. Now, we see that, well, of course, that some of the harm that happened is illegal, but something under the legal perspective is harmful as well. Minimum wage, for example, and that we can't make sure that that is enough for workers, right? We cannot be sure that tax that company is given to government really come back to that society. What if it go back to some other side of other community? So we think the company in that area should solve the problem in that community, should actually give benefit to that community in the mid place. And we think that expansion of corporation, more workers, and those stuff, we think it's only one benefit, but however, to give additional benefits to those workers is a nice thing as well. Now, before second class, yes.
What's wrong with increasing minimum wage? What's wrong with increasing regulations? Why do you have to actively force corporations to do charity work?
We think that's not exclusive, right? Well, we can also give back charity and also add on that salary as well. But however, it depends on the calculation of the company. But we see that something more tangible, some tangible benefit given by company by building an actual school is something visible. You cannot really calculate what happened to the society by just giving that extra wages.
Like your model.
No. Okay. So I just want to talk about why government is not enough, right? Like why we really need company to actively help in this. Now, we think that we want to bypass bureaucracy. In Paul's speech, she said that, well, you have no problem at all with the principle of giving back. It's just the idea of the approach itself. How about, well, company actually, communicate with government somehow, and they actually actively solve the problem at hand, right? Because if you think that the right approach is that, then, well, you have the will to do so and the feasibility to do so. How about, well, the next problem is, what company gonna do with the money if they don't give back in charity? They're just gonna expand, maybe build more like a beautiful poster or whatever. That money, well, is a lost cause. And we think that by putting some I don't know, gala dinner that corporations always have to give back to society, I think it's more beneficial under that point, right? We also need to bypass bureaucracy, that because the one body of government is not enough, but other body of social enterprise should chip in as well. Now, we also have this idea that coming in the second speaker, that this actually benefit for the company itself, right? The company never have an incentive to give back because the price is more under their model. However, we see a changing trend in consumer that right now they are buying more from companies that contribute back. That company image is good, more consumer would buy more to their company. So it is now cost-worthy. Even though the cost of the product increased, if they show that they actually help community, there will be more consumer choosing them anyway. So there's no loss cost on the company at the moment. For example, you see more consumers going for products that go green, that show that they recycle. And we think that company, by showing goodwill to the society, would just do the same. Now, to summarize my speech, I would say that it's a duty for corporation as one sector of community that have large impact, and that we could not just rely on government all the time, right? We can actively doing this by pinpointing like which problem in society should be solved and therefore have charity. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we really need to contribute back. We cannot just sit there, relax, and let government do all of it. It's not an effective model. Thank you.
Speaker spoke for 7 minutes and 24 seconds. 724.
No, I don't think so. I think she contradicted herself once too. Nikki,เข้าที่ไหนนี่นะหมายถึงตัวเองว่าอะไรนะโอ๊ยบ้าทุเรศอุบาทที่สุดแกมา
So Speaker, giving jobs to 2,000 people under your umbrella only does not make sense you to destroy the environment or to hurt the other people in other communities. We don't think that even those minimum wages of those people that you hire does not equal to the damages done to these communities or to the damages done to this kind of environment. Simply because you expand your jobs, but if you can't because your corporate fails, we think that it does not mean that that's already enough social responsibility for the very society you live in, right? So the very first question that they claim is tax really enough? Is tax and the way that they only hire these new people is really enough, right? We think that even if you have the tax to go there and build the public infrastructure properly, maybe it's really enough for like normal people because you don't have that much impact on society. Because your very mere and single action that you have towards the environment, for example, or towards the very communities that you live in is not that much harmful, right? But once we talk about these very big companies, we talk about these factories, the very whole being that you have, right, creates very huge like air pollution, for example. It's really bad, right? They even agree with us. They're okay even. When once it's a law that you have like some regulations saying that you must not pollute and up to this point. But what if this very regulation or this very law that the government says already contradicts with the fact that you can actually make money or the only social responsibility that you have in terms of making profit, right? What if the government says you have to change your very production process to be environmental friendly, to be green, because we think it's better for community, it's better for society. But you say, but this is not what I want to do. This is not my social responsibility. Because my social responsibility is not to change my Coca-Cola cans to be green, but I only want to make profit. Then we say that we stand for on the grounds that you also agree some part, right? In terms of how you act, you also have to make this kind of law in terms of regulating them in terms of controlling these people, right? That's why we say that even some laws do already has a trend, right? That you have the EIA, for example, environmental impact assessment. That's why the government has this kind of right to actually control into what extent that you have to have this kind of social responsibility. We support this kind of trend. We support the kind of line that the government is trying to do. The second reason, right, is making profit the only social responsibility of corporations. We say no, right? In terms of the idea, even the taxations, right? If this kind of principle is so absolute that you only have to make money, then you also should be exempted for any kind of tax, right? Because you already hire a lot of workers all around the world in all of your the country and even all your communities, right? Then you should all be exempted for tax, but because you already make money and you already fulfill the very social responsibility that you have, right? But the truth is you are not exempted from tax, right? The very principle that the government injects on you is the fact that you too should have the social responsibility. But why does you should have more than the normal individuals? Because the very fact that you are there creates even more social impacts than the normal people, right? We talk about how do these factories or these companies actually have like more air pollutions and the footprints than the people. So lastly, on the ideas, this is really a duty. We think that that's why we say everyone has a duty, right? Everyone should have this kind of duty to social responsibility in different ways, right? That's why we have like military service, for example, for individuals, because they have to contribute to the social responsibility in the way that they can. But well, these corporations are legal persons, they cannot just go there and fight in the front line. Then we say that you do what you can, you have the money, and you contribute the money. What's wrong with that? The only response that they have is because the government is already doing it and it's fine. We think that the more, the merrier, because once you're actually there to help the government, it's even better. What's wrong of helping these people to be even more moral? We think this is a duty and this is something that we should do. Tax is not enough. Tax is not enough. Hiring more people is definitely not enough. We're very proud to oppose.
Even for 4 minutes, 30 seconds.
Give social responsibility.
Expense, so reduce your tax bill. So that's what they know. That's how they do CSR. They didn't do that.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
Oh wait, maybe I did.
You did still.
Let me see. Oh, I did.
Maybe teach you more to the law now.
I could hear from his.
There are 3 questions that I think you should ask yourself when you're adjudicating this debate. The first question is really, what is the nature of corporate social responsibility or social responsibility? Because I think we've been having a debate about what exactly this should include in terms of definition. So I think it makes sense to get it clear on what we were trying to actually say in the debate. And the second question is, what is the proper allocation of labor or responsibility in society? Who does what, and what's the best way to share the burden? And thirdly, in terms of economics, who really generates more wealth for society, or what kind of role generates more wealth for society? So on the first question, right, what is the nature of corporate social responsibility? Me and Tida are in complete agreement when we say that if a company goes in and pollutes or exploits a community, they will have to be responsible for it because it's illegal. If you pollute something, the government will fine you anyway and probably will force you to clean it up. And that makes sense because you were the one who did it. If you exploit labor, it's probably going to be against national human rights laws and international human rights laws. It's already illegal and you'll have to pay for it anyway. We're completely agreeing with that. So I asked Tita, above these things that we just talked about, what else should you be responsible for? And this is the trouble of the entire opposition side, because they failed to give us concretely what exactly you should be responsible for. The ideas that Tita were giving us that, oh, well, if you build a building too high and block someone's view, you should be responsible for regulating yourself too, because you shouldn't block people's views. She also talked about, well, if people have hurt feelings, corporations should act as psychiatrists too, and be responsible for how people feel. And thirdly, Monique said, well, you should go back and plant trees and you cut them down. Well, firstly, if you're going to cut trees in a country already, the government probably sold you the rights to cut down the trees in that country anyway. So it's not like you went in there free to cut down the trees. You already paid for it. But in addition to that, you're asking, you paid for the right to cut down trees. The government got the money already for those trees, but yet you have to plant back. So our question is, if the government already paid for it, then why is it that it's not the government who has to plant back the trees despite selling off the rights to cut down the trees? It doesn't really make sense. right? Because we think that the nature of social responsibility is that it cannot be specific. As soon as you specify what it is that you should be responsible for, it turns into a government regulation. The only way the concept of corporate social responsibility is to work is that it stays as a vague idea that, this is something that you should do above and beyond what you already can, whatever it is that you could do. And they try to make this specific by saying that, well, we're going to force people to do what they should do above and beyond they're already doing, without really telling us what exactly it is that they should do. And they can't, because it's a basic philosophical problem, right? The idea of telling people they have duty to do things, but not telling them what exactly those duties are, it's exactly the problem of talking about duties. And they talked about tax and saying, when you tax people and corporations, that basically proves our argument that you're already giving back to society somehow, and what they're proposing is just an extension of this tax analogy, right? We're going to say there's two very big differences with tax. Firstly, when you tax, you're not forcing people to act. And why? Because the government, one, has the role to act in society. That's why governments were formed in the first place. And secondly, governments are probably the best actors to act with that money, because they do oversee all kinds of things that we would be concerned about when we talk about social responsibility. And thirdly, we're not forcing the corporations to do anything. They're just paying the money for the government to do something else. But you're saying that the government should be the ones to do something else. Now, secondly, what is the proper role of the government? We think that their view of government is very minimalistic, right? They say that government should be there to enforce what people should do. But the fact that we have a government is precisely to do things that we're not sure we should do, or things that we can't do by ourselves. So that's the entire point of creating a government in the first place. And they never justified why we should outsource all these things that we typically think the government should do to corporations as things that they're not using. And this feeds into the last question of economics, right? And who really generates more wealth. We think that in terms of profit generation, that is basically how governments generate wealth for society. They hire more workers, they generate more wealth, give them more money, and that's how economies grow. And the role, and this is where Pond made her big contradiction, right? She said that right now, because some companies are socially responsible, some are not, they're at a disadvantage. But if you said that CSR was already benefiting some countries because they look good, then how exactly are they at a disadvantage in the first place? So your idea of economic benefits doesn't really work, and that's why we're proud to propose. Thank you.